What's up guys, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how I am actively building scalable systems that aim to kill chaos. With this builds basically to show you our builds raw and real, what it is, the good, the bad, the ugly, to show that what we are building today is going to paint a picture or basically build the mental models and frameworks that we're going to be using into the future and to solve problems where it hurts for businesses and organizations, basically to kill their chaos, and also just to call in visionaries, basically people that understand what our mission is, and just to network with cool people building cool things at the same time. So how I'm actively building systems that scale is broken down into 5 simple steps as always, with number one being automating repetitive tasks. And why this is key is just ultimately saying, hey, manual work kills scale. Ultimately, if you want to scale what it is that you're doing in terms of systems building and also processes in-house, you ultimately just gonna have to automate. Otherwise, you just constantly just gonna be hitting the same thing each and every single time, which is ultimately just gonna say, hey, like, we're inputting data all the time when we could just save time and use that time to better effect. And just saying, hey, we need to basically make sure that we're automating what it is that is repetitive in terms of what it is that we're doing in-house and also externally for the clients that we're building out. And also saying, hey, automation frees you to close deals with 25k. So ultimately to say, we need to make sure that what we're doing to build what it is that we're doing, to say that, hey, we need to build automations, because ultimately it's going to bring the focus back to closing deals and just ultimately creating value. It would be the number one thing to say, hey, we just ultimately just need to create value and we just need to close deals, or ultimately to work on the things that actually push the needle forward. And saying, hey, how I'm actively doing this is setting up lambda sequences, pitching emails, nudging emails, value emails, closing emails. So basically different sequences that we're building at the moment to test, also A/B test them, to say, hey, we have pitch emails, we're running email outreach specifically that we're going to pitch first for in the first email, then some that we're going to drop value first, and then we're just going to compare the data, and also inputting like different sequences in terms of saying, hey, we're going to pitch first, we're going to nudge, then we're going to create value, then we're going to close. Because one of the key metrics that I have been tracking as well is basically seeing how follow-up is doing. I think right now we are at about 10% with follow-up, so it's not super good, but we just want to hit down the nail and just solely just understand like how we can better pitch. Is it the messaging that's going off? Is it how we're nudging it? Just basically running the data and basically seeing where we need to improve in terms of how these email sequences that we're actively running for our acquisition channels, to say, hey, we use make.com to automate sync with Airtable leads to Calendly. So to say, hey, we're actively just automating and syncing our leads that we have from Calendly, from Airtable, and inputting them into Calendly. So basically just booking them on autopilot to say if the leads come through. This could be even in the lead form to basically automate the lead flows that come in, and then automatically just populate them either into Airtable or just automatically just push them into our Calendly booking, and then it automatically just books from there. And then we basically use either make.com or Zapier. Just doesn't really matter at this point in time if we're solely just doing it for the front end, just simple basic tasks. But when things get a bit more complicated, that's when we then take it a step further and just input what we need for that specific situation. And also just saying, booking those meetings on autopilot, also saying, hey, we automatically just gonna remove ourselves and automate this process and automatically just book these tools and people specifically, these leads that were coming in, and just book them on autopilot. And saying, the big lesson that I've learned here is saying automation's your clone. So basically automation is cloning what it is that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, but it's allowing you that flexibility in order to scale. And saying, once you've built it once, you're ultimately winning forever. Saying, hey, we're building it once and then we don't have to constantly build it again. Because one of the things that I have been super bullish on is ultimately just being able to build it once and then not having to rebuild it again, just ultimately just tweaking it to say, hey, if we build it right from the first time and we're making it an independent core, which we will get into that in terms of speaking about modularity, just a framework or approach to just having things modular. So That's also what I like to think about, to say, hey, it needs to be an independent part that we could build and then scale it into the future, but it is not necessarily acting as, if it breaks, then it ultimately breaks every single thing down. And then asking the first principles question of saying, what's the task that you can automate to 10x your time, to say, hey, what are the tasks that we can do on a day-to-day basis, either for me or with the team, that can ultimately lead us to 10xing our time, that we could be pumping into other avenues of our current build process, or even in development as well, to say, hey, like, what can we actively do to reduce our time that we're spending on manual tasks, to automatically just allow us to create more value into the future in terms of what it is that we're building, and also implementing or integrating what it is that we're actively building on top of the front layer, to basically say, hey, we're implementing automations and things like that on the back end stuff, and also on the front end we're just having these manual pop-ups basically saying, hey, we need to do this, or we need to run this automation, and then just allowing them to connect it that way. And then ultimately, which leads to the second point, which is using data to optimize outreach. And ultimately this is saying, hey, gut flops and data shows you what's pulling leads, ultimately saying data is going to allow us to refine our messaging, positioning, and what it is that we're building, because without data we're ultimately not going to know what it is that we need to actively be doing on a day-to-day basis. And that's what we're actively building right now in terms of what we're doing with our predictive analysis tool that's coming down later down the line. Can't go too much into that right now, but essentially it's just going to be predictive analysis in terms of keeping down the core business functions, and then just automatically just populating that and giving actionable steps. But yeah, that's all I can say for about that for now. But saying, hey, we track limitless replies in Airtable, say, hey, we got 4% reply. Trying out a new outreach funnel that we're going to be that we've been running, in terms of saying, hey, we're going to pitch first, and then we're going to see how that works, and then split testing that, and just ultimately just aiming to increase that to 8%. So basically saying, well, right now we have a 4% email response, but we ultimately trying to scale that up to 8%, so that we're just getting more data in terms of that, so that we start more conversations and are just speaking to more people. Because if we increase our reply rate, we ultimately just increase our booking rate, which ultimately increases our close rate, because the more people that reply, the more conversations that we start, ultimately getting those conversations onto a call, which ultimately just gets us in terms of saying, hey, we need to get bookings and we need to get more deals done. So essentially that. And then saying, hey, we built a Google Data Studio dashboard, saying, hey, video views that we're getting versus DMs versus calls, to see the metrics, just to ultimately just understand, is what we're doing actively working, is it not working, and how can we refine the messaging, positioning the hooks as well. Like, are we hooking within the first 3%, are we getting the hook right, and just analyzing the data. I'm sure one of the things that you guys have realized is I'm a big data person now. Before I wasn't really a super big data, and didn't use data to guide, but now that's changing. Like, one of the things is always just understanding the data, just analyzing the data every single day, understanding what are our call percentages, what are our booking percentages, what are the percentage of responses, what are the percentages of just people even watching the videos versus ending the video. So within the first 30 seconds, for example, how many people are DMing us, how many people are we on calls with, and just analyzing that data and trying to bump it up. And then saying, hey, what's the core data point that tells you your outreach is winning? This could be response rate, this could be your responses, how many people are responding, this could be how many people you're booking. It just ultimately just depends. For us, it's basically how many responses we have, because the more responses we have, the more conversations we have. But we're still figuring this out at the moment. We're still trying to test it out. But in terms of the build process, what we have when we build out our systems, the key core metrics that you could use, for example, is just how long is the session time, in terms of how our clients are using the platform that we're building out. So saying, if they're logging in at 2 p.m. and they're logging out at 6 p.m., that's a good session time. It means they're actually using our product. Because one of the things that I've realized recently, or not recently, but that I've realized, is most people need to be using the product that you're ultimately building out. Otherwise, they're just going to get frustrated and they're not going to use it, and then it's going to be down to you. But ultimately, just getting that session time and tracking that session time in terms of the actual builds that we have, in terms of the systems that we're building, to make sure that we have that and generate data off of that, ultimately just allows us to move more tactically and agile into the future, to also just fully understand, is what we're building out fully, where does the value lie, and ultimately just building from that and saying, hey, we need to build modular systems. This is the part that I was specifically referring to in the beginning, to say a one size fits all fails. Ultimately saying, if you just going to take the same approach each and every single time, most of the time it does sometimes work, but ultimately sometimes having modular systems that flexibility ultimately allows for catering for different planners and different business owners, to say, hey, if we have the modularity in terms of what it is that we're building, and also the in-house systems that we have, we ultimately just allow for that flexibility that allows us to then create, for example, a in-house demo. So hey, we built a custom in-house demo that we only show to our clients, which is showing our vendor syncs, budget trackers, and timeline alerts, to basically say, we have an in-house tool that we have built specifically for our ICP that ultimately handles all of this that we show to them, and just building this out. And not all the features will be necessarily required for them, to say, hey, they're going to need all the single features and that. They might not need budget tracking, they might not need timeline alerts, but just ultimately just building that and allowing it to be modular, meaning independent in its own right, so that we can build on top of it. Also just ultimately allows, for example, we can just basically focus on vendor syncs. So we can say, hey, we need to build a platform that solely focuses on vendor syncs, and then ultimately just building that as a core function or core platform within itself, and not build like other things like budget trackers, timeline alerts, and ultimately just build off of that first, and then we can move into different basically different features that we're going to be integrating. And then saying, hey, customized it for wedding planners, save 20 hours per week. So our target is mainly just to save as much time as possible, to quantify what it is that we're doing, the ROI that we have. Is it saving time? Is it saving money? Basically just asking those questions, and how do we actively just track that, and what are the cost benefits of having the system, and ultimately just creating as much value as we possibly can. And saying, hey, the biggest lesson is build it once, tweak for each client, scale without breaking. Basically templatizing, I don't know if that's even a word, but basically just templatizing what it is that we're building, making a template, and then ultimately just allowing us to have the flexibility to change it, and also to basically hammer it down to tailor it for our specific ICP, to make sure that we're hitting where it hurts the most for them. And then saying, hey, what's the simplest system you could build to solve 80% of your ICP's pain? So like I said in the beginning, this is either one of these three things that we look at: vendor syncs, budget trackers, timeline alerts. And then ultimately just say we're building specifically for one of each, or just all three, just depends. And then we're just hammering down on that, because we already have an in-house tool that we have built that we're actively using as well on a day-to-day basis, to basically just build on top of. Then we can just integrate that and build it from scratch, kind of build it from scratch for our ICP, and then just scale it up from there. And then say, hey, number 4, which is integrate team tools for seamless flow. So one of the things is ultimately just saying we need to be as seamless as we possibly can. So why this is key is basically siloed tools waste time, to basically say integrations make your system a machine. So we want to take this system and turn it into a machine. We want to make sure that we're actively just pumping what we possibly can, and making it as seamless as we possibly can. But also data is going to guide, and feedback is also going to guide how seamless our platform or our backend solution is going to be. And how we're actively doing this on our side is basically saying, hey, we linked Lemlist to Airtable with Zapier to basically saying we were creating the bridge or the medium, which is Zapier, to basically connect the Lemlist tool, the Lemlist people that respond, to auto log the replies that we have and then pump it into Airtable, so that we have that data to say, hey, these are the responses that we had. Actively at the moment, I'm possibly looking at taking the same approach that we're doing in terms of the user feedback, where we basically log each and every one and then we create summaries. But I'm still just kind of just deciding if it's really worth it building it out at this present moment in time, or we just wait it out and wait until we get enough data, say for example 500 plus, to basically say we need 500 plus, and then we're going to categorize it and then have it from there. But I'm still figuring it out, but I will let you guys know when we do that. And then saying connected Calendly to Slack, get bookings, booking alerts instantly, basically saying that we need to basically automate this process, just not having this standalone as a standalone, to ultimately say we need to integrate this into our workflow, to say, hey, we need to connect a Calendly to Slack, so whenever we get a booking, we ultimately just populates into our Slack and we just know who we're speaking to, and then we can just set up the email from there. I mean the call from there, sorry. And then biggest lesson I've learned from here is integrations are your glue. Make your tool talk, to make sure that all the tools that you have in your tool stack or your tech stack is ultimately just communicating with each other. You don't want a position where you have these integrations and they don't even connect with each other pretty well, so, and they're not even scalable and maintainable in the long run. So you ultimately just want to make sure that what you're building your infrastructure on is ultimately for scale, to say, hey, this is going to still be a ROI best for our business in the next 5 years plus. And ultimately this tech stack, even if we have to accommodate or we have to shift or we have to move things around, we ultimately actively have a plan for that and we understand how to do that. Because one of the things you don't want to do is just build it and then connect it to different tools, but they don't even integrate each other well. So this is the point where I like to take my time to solely just understand what integrations we're currently running and how to make them work, and saying, hey, what's the core integration that could cut our manual work in half? Ultimately just asking the question, how can we cut our manual work that we're actively doing in half, so that we can scale and use that time better and more effectively to basically close deals and to get more clients and create more value and just chat to more people, while also building out the systems that we're building. And then which moves to the final point that basically ties everything together, which is perfection which is test and iterate fast. So moving fast, moving tactically is super important. Ultimately just being able to test things and making things break, because that's where growth comes from. This is just my personal take, like growth comes from when things are going bad, if you say so. Just being able to move more tactically and moving fast and just breaking things and iterating even faster. I like to say iteration is the key to innovation. So ultimately just saying we're going to iterate as much as possible, so that in order to innovate what it is that we're building out, and saying, hey, perfection's a trap. I used to be a big believer on getting things right perfect first time, but that ultimately did not serve me any better than it is right now. So ultimately just understanding that has been a game changer, to say, hey, we don't have to get it right from the start, and ultimately just allow us to build it and test and tweak fast. So MVPs come in super handy in this, just getting an MVP out, because perfectionism is a trap sometimes. So yeah, and then how I'm actively doing this is A/B testing limitless subjects, fix chaos versus save 10k, found a winner, saying, hey, what has been working is ultimately saying save 10k, because if we quantify the risk and the quantity of what it is that they're losing, will ultimately allow us to get the messaging down, even if it's putting it in a more emotional sense, to say, hey, we need to actively just say use emotional tone in terms of our messaging, and ultimately just using that to basically message and position our offer better. And then saying, hey, built a website in 7 days, got feedback, tweaked for bookings, to ultimately say we need to reduce the time that it takes us to build a platform, even a website, or even the backend systems that we're building out. We need to build it out as soon as possible, but we can have flexibility into the future to then just perfect it. But ultimately the most important thing is just the result, and saying, hey, speed beats perfect. Launch, learn, and level up. So basically launch, learn from it, get the data, get the feedback loops, and then level up from that, and ultimately just understand that what it is that you're building out, you're just gonna have to launch it. Otherwise you'll never know, and you'll never get the data that you need in order to allow you to have the flexibility and also the scalability into the future to know how you can best tweak it. And then ultimately just asking the final questions that ties this whole thing up, which is basically what's the fastest way to test your system and learn what's working. Ultimately saying we need to ask what it is that is in our core function, either internally or externally, and saying, hey, we need to understand what's the fastest way that we can test our system in order to learn what is working, and getting the data and the feedback as well that allows us to move faster into the future, tweak, test, and iterate to say, hey, we need to launch, learn, and level up as well. That we need to just actively be asking these questions and just have this mindset towards building stuff, and just making sure that when stuff breaks, we ultimately have a plan for that as well, and that we're actively building scalable systems that kill chaos. And yeah, so this is basically my framework, my thought process or approach to building scalable systems that kill chaos. And ultimately we're just gonna keep refining this process, figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and I will keep you guys in the loop as well. And if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to check me out on LinkedIn, X, Instagram as well, and make sure to subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.